Morning, everyone. Gishijoke Deshnakas. It's wonderful to be here and be in Algonquin territory. So many familiar faces, students. I was saying to Colin that my teachers were Alistair MacLeod and Patrick Lane and Don Coles. So, there's kind of a continuum. Nothing is ever in isolation. So I just pass on what I learned, and it just keeps continuing. So it's getting late. So thank you guys for those who've stuck with it. This book is a biography. I'll read one prose piece. There's a couple poems in there too. I'll read as well, and then I'll jump into the poetry. I've written the biography. After making the film, I jumped into this project, and it just came out in September. And Norval Morrisseau, for those of you who don't know who he was, I'll read a little bit about him, and then I'll jump into it. Norval Morrisseau, Copper Thunderbird, was born in 1932 in the isolated Ojibwe community of Sand Point in remote northwestern Ontario. And having lived a tumultuous life of extreme highs and lows, he died in Toronto in 2007. Critics, art historians, and curators alike consider him one of the most innovative artists of the 20th century, and arguably Canada's greatest painter. Among his many awards and honours are the Order of Canada and an Aboriginal Achievement Award. Referred to as the Picasso of the North by the French press, he was the only Canadian painter invited to France to celebrate the bicentennial of the French Revolution in 1989. A self-taught painter, Norval Morrisseau came to the attention of the Canadian art scene in 1962 with his first solo and breakthrough exhibition at the Pollock Gallery in Toronto. This sold-out show announced the arrival of an artist like no other in the history of Canadian art. In the first ever review of his work, the Globe and Mail art critic Pearl McCarthy declared him a genius. So there are many pieces. This is a biography. It's woven together as a story. And I thought I would start this one with a very interesting piece. It's 1972, so he's born 1932, do the math. He's separated from his wife, and this is what happens. Bad medicine. Always the Thunderbird man, Morrisseau is always on the move, always changing into someone else in the process. After the trial in Kenora in Toronto, after the trial in Kenora, he is in Toronto, Vancouver, Winnipeg, and in the blink of an eye, the flap of a wing, he lands in Thunder Bay. And by autumn of 1974, he is visiting Curve Lake Reserve near Peterborough, halfway across the province. Alice Olson, originally from the Red Lake region, married and living in Curve Lake at the time, tells of meeting him while visiting her sister in Thunder Bay. Morrisseau recognizes her from Red Lake, where 10 years earlier she was the director of recreation for the Indian Friendship Center. By this time he is separated from Harriet, and their relationship is beyond mending. And when Alice introduces him to her younger sister Doris, a long-haired beauty in the process of embracing her identity, Norval remembers her from Red Lake as well, and cannot take his eyes off her. Having lived in the same community, knowing the Ojibwe language, knowing the same people, Norval Morrisseau and Alice Olson quickly become friends. We got along so well I invited him back east for a visit, she says. I didn't think he would come. But as the conductor is closing the door to the train, taking Alice home, Morrisseau and his 16-year-old daughter Victoria come running down the platform and jump on board. Morrisseau knows that Doris will soon be heading east too and stopping in Curve Lake. She is planning to join the Native People's Caravan, a cross-country trek protesting broken treaties and land right grievances, which is due to arrive in Ottawa and march on Parliament Hill. When they arrive in Curve Lake, Norval and Victoria bunk in with Alice Olson and her young family. His daughter hung around with him, Olson says, and joked with him all the time, and like a typical teenager got things she wanted out of him. There was only one time Olson ever saw him get really angry with her. We were sitting at the kitchen table, and he had just come out of the bathroom with his hair sopping wet. I didn't think anything of it, assuming he had just washed it. That's when Victoria piped up and began teasing him that he was dyeing his hair so he could look younger for the ladies. He must have been doing it for my younger sister, who was expected to arrive any day, because boy, did he get mad at her. He quickly forgave her, though. You could tell he really loved his daughter. Constantly making art, Morisot sets up a table in the basement and paints every day. Some of the paintings he sells to Wetang Ojibwe Art and Crafts Gallery on the reserve, establishing a relationship with them that will become useful to him later on. Other pieces he sells to whomever will buy them on the reserve in Peterborough, and some he gives away. Indicative of his enormous talent, he carves Olson a large wooden spoon as though hearkening back to his early Red Lake years. He also gives her an etching done on a sheet of birch bark. Doris telephones to say she is on her way, and Morisot cannot contain himself, his anticipation, anxiety getting the better of him. He takes a taxi into Peterborough and purchases the brightest red shirt he can find, a tie and a pair of checkered pants, along with a bottle of wine. His hair dyed, a set of new clothes, he wants to be stylish and as primed as ever for her. His love for Doris builds unabated, and he falls for her like a stone. Perhaps he lets it happen consciously, doesn't bother to catch himself because he feels it is the only medicine that will cure him from his breakup with Harriet. Perhaps he's thinking about her when he paints self-portrait devoured by his own passion, depicting the artist's constant struggle with his emotions. Morisot, the hopeless, obsessive romantic. In a gesture of seduction, he writes Doris a love letter on the back of his art pad, a surprising song of fresh love. Refreshing light upon a man's soul, your beauty, your lips and eyes, the very look you gave me burns deep inside of me, a flame, a touch that no liquid could ever put out. One look upon those angel-like eyes gives me life to exist another 20 years of youth. My beloved, you would make anyone very happy, even to have you as a friend. Norval. P.S. What joy to this searching heart to see in reality and the soul who bears that beauty, Doris, my secret love. That night Morisot gets into the wine, his tie askew, his pants fly open. He appears happy enough. He and the Olson family pose for a photo among a stand of white birch. The day is blue and beautiful. Alice is sitting near his feet with her 2 children. Doris is standing beside Morisot, laughing. But otherwise the visit does not go well for him. Doris has little romantic interest in Morisot, and soon leaves with a young man from the reserve. Morisot wakes to discover they have gone off together to meet the caravan to Ottawa. He becomes extremely upset, and Alice Olson sees another side of him. He broods all day and goes out, and then stays away until evening. When he returns, he has a paper bag with him, a heavy one, the kind from the liquor store. He opens the paper bag for her to look inside. She cannot make out what it is. Feathers, something dark. She is uncertain. He tells her to look closer, and she realizes with the shock of surprise that it is a mallard's green head in the bag. It stares up at her with its dull, dead eyes. "What are you doing with that?" she asks, quickly stepping away. "I'm going to fix her," he says. "I'm going to make something bad happen to her, take away her looks." Alice can see that he's not joking. This is serious. She becomes frightened and beseeches him to do something, beseeches him not to do anything. "In the name of our friendship," she says, "think of my parents up north in Trout Lake. Please don't do anything." She explains that Doris is young and didn't mean to hurt his feelings. For a moment, Morisot just sits at the table, not saying anything, brooding like he's been doing all day, until finally he mumbles, "Okay," and he goes outside and buries the bag in the backyard. He and Victoria leave the next day. Alice Olson cannot recall how many paintings Morisot completed during his 2-week visit with them. But he was always seemed to have money, and by the time he leaves there are 5 half-finished paintings on the table in the basement. His creativity like a river flowing through his hands. He has no need to take them because he knows there will always be more. So there are a few poems in the book, and I'll read a couple of them. Starts off with Life Scroll, and each poem is based on a painting. Life Scroll. And for those of you who don't know Norval Morrisseau's art, this is it here. So you can show you a couple more. You've seen it, I'm sure. You can close your eyes and lock those images in your head. So what are his sources? They were Ojibwe. We have in Medewan Grand Medicine Society, we have scrolls that the shaman would etch on the dreams of the supplicants. They would be going through their vision, so this shaman would etch their dreams. These are kind of iconoclastic images on these scrolls of birch bark. There's also the pictographs and the petroglyphs. Those were other sources, but he also grew up beside the dump, so he looked at comic books, he looked at magazines, and he pulled it all together to create these images. So there are no antecedent. This is unique. He created those images. Prior to him painting, they didn't exist. So this piece is called Life Scroll, and he did a kind of a version of the sacred scrolls. Where your dreams find you in the blue lake of your mind and vibrate to the surface like a speckled trout. Where a long forgotten rock face turns into your face and vision points in the direction of youth, middle age, old age. Where gnarled fingers slide with precision along a map of birch bark and belief and ritual hold hands. Where there is no one but you and the echoes of ancestors in the halls of your loneliest night. Where all creation rests on the back of the strongest and depends upon the grasp of the weakest, and all is related. Where you learn the art of listening and the old words drip into the stone bowl of your deafness. Where you learn the art of seeing the old signs or owl eyes that stare into the forest of your ignorance. Where you must learn how to love and be loved and admit that your journey too will soon come to an end. Thunderbird and Snake. A man rides on the wings of a thunderbird. The man's body is below is hunger. He is always hunger for the sweet flesh of the vine. The man prays for repentance. It does no good. When the sun is down, he goes out of his mind with appetite and slides along the ground into anything. He dreams for his thunderbird spirit to come in for the kill. The man wants to destroy this body that has a mind of its own. He begins with 3 dots of yellow for eyes. Thunderbird, man, snake. He begins with creation, sky world, world, underworld. Indian Jesus Christ. Once again, he is the blessed child in the midst of adoration, exaltation. Our Father who art in heaven, as his knees grind upon the into the wood floor, and a throbbing 8 moves up his legs and drips off his upper lip into his cupped hands. Staring up at the stained glass Christ above the priest and altar, he tries to focus on the one ray of light filtering through halo and flame like the divine Spirit himself, so that he might rise up to the rafters and beyond into cool heaven. The prayer for salvation never comes. Christ and his legion of angels never once lift the roof off the chapel, carry him into a chorus of hallelujahs. Morrisseau is left to find his own wings, and he does, painting his own remembering, his hands bursting into holy acrylic pain. Indian canoe. Behind the blink of a dream, the shaman paints himself into voyage and travels with the people who have been paddling all their lives for centuries back to the source of religion. Bishop Pichu Wadamanit, spirit guide, swims the underworld, swirling out of a whirlpool. Sign of medicine and presence, a prayer for calm water. Loon shapes the canoe in an elegant song of loyalty and beauty, head held high for the distant horizon, vigilant for the people. Sturgeon supports the fragile vessel, master of deep water, strength and sweet flesh, given in self-sacrifice, beloved totems. And the four aboard, man, woman, child, shaman, paddle or paintbrush in hand, painted in red ochre on stone and bound together, transformed innumerable times by innumerable artists so the people might continue. Sacred Bear from Visions, so this is again one of his paintings, 1959-60. When he prays to Makwa, not to Aber, but Bear, life spirit, one and more than one, the eye of perception pried open in youth. He is always the boy who lay before him all those years ago, supplicant and fearful. Makwa roused on hind legs, nose up, sniffing the arrogant nature of human stink. He recognizes the boy and laughs a hearty laugh at the pitiful thing who doesn't realize the mystery of his own making. Until much later, when the boy man grows out of his short sight and paints himself with a bare head and a medicine bag around his neck, inside cobalt, azure, magenta, rose red, lemon yellow, all the beauty of creation, until he finally sees who he is, where he is going. Angry Thunderbird, 1960. Of the old stories, the belief in wings of thunder and eyes of lightning, you wrapped comfortable in the style of the moment, secure in the civilization of your apartment. This flat image of what seems a bird with a small sack of something, electric eyes, divided circles. This is your mind on the midday road when the sky turns black and you are suddenly no longer secure or certain. Because for all your education, you still tuck fear under your pillow and rest your head on it every night. And for a moment it lifts you high above your knowing into the claws of something huge, immense. Windigo, 1979. White-haired giant stuffing his sharp mouth, his greedy guts, an oily ocean. Sometimes a hard night cracks the shore in the high sun, a fissure erupts and the artist finds himself plastered to sand. Greed, gluttony, the vices of our age turned into virtues. Read all about it. White-collar thieves turned into porn stars. Sometimes he sits on a bench with an empty bottle of fuel and weeps into his hands. The faint crunch of bone, always there gnawing at something or someone just beyond the scene. Sometimes he hears it inside himself, growling for more gut rot, for forgetting. 500 years of blood and booze, politicians and police, and a stinking pit of bodies the size of the world. Sometimes his face is false, a false face carved from a living tree. Its crazy grin warning him to beware. The salivating tongue of humankind, a red flag stuffed into his mouth, your mouth, and then pulled out and out and out. Just read a couple more. Transformation. 1970. He's up in Red Lake drinking in the snake pit, when he tells them that his people knew things they could never fathom. And Zizen, he says, ways of being, and they laugh in his face. And his first thought that goes through his head is to tell them to go to hell. Instead, he goes home and paints the feeling out of himself, the side of him they don't dare see. The thing that percolates out of him like black coffee, rises through his skin, drips out of his eyes, and spills onto the canvas. Bear walk. That's what the painting becomes. A shaman with thick bare ears and a blunt bare snout, blowing his bare breath into a newborn, wrapped like a present. An apprentice who will grow up on all fours, growling, who will arrive at their door when they least expect it, when they are snug in their bed, one arm around a wife, the other already around him. So I'll just read two more here. I'm not going to let Norvell off the hook. This is called Children with Flowers. When he thinks of his 7 children, he thinks of flowers, a whole field of them, sunrise red and sunset pink and sky blue petals shimmering in the painterly light. And so he paints them as the babies they once were. Victoria, David, Pierre, Eugene, Christian, Michelle, Lisa, over and over again. Each child happy as a butterfly, each one held forever in his arms. Life as fragrant, as sweet as a flower, just beyond their reach. And the last poem I'll read is Natural Balance. Examine the pretty painting. 5 birds, possibly loons, animals emerging one out of another. Examine the pretty colors, rose red, apple green, purple, petals, sea blue. Look no further. It's what you've been waiting for. Oh, your poor confusion. Miigwech, thank you.